Oh, hi, welcome back to Mia Likes Movies. My name is Mia and I like movies. I like a lot of other things too, but Mia Likes Movies just makes sense. I guess I should address the elephant in the room. This is a very bad cosplay of one of the Dimitrescu daughters. You choose. Why? Because we're talking about Resident Evil Village today. There will be spoilers throughout this video. Just saying, if you don't want to be spoiled for the entire plot of Resident Evil Village and most of the plot for Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, then get out of here, okay? This is not for you. But if you don't mind getting spoiled or you've already played the game, stick around. We're going to get into it right away, but before we do, make sure to like, subscribe, and let's just do it, okay? So overall, I'd have to say that Resident Evil is one of my favorite franchises of all time. Thinking back, Resident Evil 4 is one of the first mature games that I ever played. The ever-adapting lore, the characters, the puzzles, these all have kept the fans of the franchise on their toes for decades. With the release of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, we entered a new era for the franchise. A new protagonist with a fresh perspective and point of view, quite literally. It's the first Resident Evil game with first-person perspective, whereas all the other ones were third-person. However, today we are not focusing solely on Resident Evil 7. Instead, we will be focusing on its direct sequel, Resident Evil Village, also known as Resident Evil 8. Released in the first half of 2021, development and production were slowed and affected by the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. Resident Evil Village was the perfect post-pandemic release due to its focus on themes such as disease, family, and loss, all of which were cultural topics of conversation throughout the COVID-19 epidemic. Resident Evil Village, RE8, which I will probably refer to it as because it's shorter, was a great sequel for the time, specifically for the Western audience, because while it continued the story of Resident Evil 7, it removed itself from the context of being trapped in a house with a Southern American family. Instead, it takes place in a distant Eastern European town with more fantastical antagonists. If you are unfamiliar with Resident Evil 7, it was released in 2017 and was set in Dulvey Parish, Louisiana, also sometimes just referred to as Dulvey. Ethan Winters, the protagonist, travels there to save his wife Mia, which is crazy, that's my name, from the Baker family. It appears that before they were infected with the diseased mold, the Baker family was a very stereotypical nuclear family in America. However, after the mold took control, their family and home became a trap. Almost the entirety of RE7 takes place within the Baker house and on their property. The Resident Evil Village Wikipedia page quoted an interview with producer Tsuyoshi Kanda, stating that compared to the claustrophobic feeling of the Baker mansion in RE7, the horror in RE8 came from the uncertainty of what lurks in the openness of the village, and that they took an entirely different approach with the openness of the village, and players not knowing what might be lurking beyond the trees. While the developers of the game could not have possibly predicted the COVID-19 pandemic, and they started development on Resident Evil Village prior to the outbreak, it was very smart of them to move the setting of the sequel to RE7 away from the Baker home. As we all know from experience, we were quarantined for quite a long time during the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything was shut down and we did not know when we would return to normal, if we ever would. Now imagine if Resident Evil 7 was released in 2020 or 2021. You find out or hear that the plot of the game takes place in a house for most of the game, with a family infected by an extremely contagious disease that appears to be spread by the air. I don't know, does that sound familiar? I would not want to play that. I would not pick up that game. It would remind me too much of my recent reality, a recent reality that we were all looking for some way to escape. Resident Evil Village gave us that opportunity with its more fantastical characters and generally Eastern European setting. Again, I am approaching this from a Western audience perspective, specifically set in America. People in other countries may feel differently, but as an American, this is my point of view on taking it away from being set in America, if that makes sense. The director of Resident Evil Village, Morimasa Sato, stated that many of the enemies that appear in RE8 are inspired by many figures that you might find in classic or gothic horror. In another interview, the art director, Tomonori Takano, explained that Lady Dimitrescu was inspired by vampires, while other characters were based on werewolves, mermen, and ghosts. Lycans, one of the most common enemies of the game, were obviously inspired by werewolves. Salvatore Moreau, who is one of the four lords in the titular village and bosses of the game, is very, and I do mean very loosely based on mermen. And ghosts and possessions are frequent within the Bienvento home. The 4 major sections of this game, before you get to the final section with Mother Miranda, are based upon these 4 types of creatures as enemies. Again, creating a sense of fantasy and escapism that was previously unexplored in the very typically scientifically rooted villains of the Resident Evil franchise. That being said, there is still some science at the heart of the events of Resident Evil Village. Mother Miranda, known previously as just simply Miranda, is our main antagonist of this game. Prior to her rise as the mysterious cult leader of the village, she was a biologist in the early 1910s. After her only daughter died from the Spanish flu, she discovered the mold. Yes, this is the same mold in Resident Evil 7, in a nearby cave. She became infected by the mold, discovering an ability to mutate. For the next century or so, Miranda would experiment with the mold, creating the Cadu. Cadu are essentially nematodes, which are like parasitic worms that were infected with the mold as well. Miranda was experimenting with this Cadu and the mold in general in an attempt to create a host to preserve her daughter's consciousness. These experiments would create the aforementioned lichens, as well as give the 4 lords of the village, Lady Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, Donna Bienviento, and Moreau, their powers. This would also lead to the kidnapping of Ethan Winter's baby daughter, Rosemary, which is the inciting incident for our game. To draw connections back to my original argument and thesis, as previously mentioned, the mold is spread through the air, albeit by spores and not how it works with COVID. I did do research on it, but I can't articulate that kind of stuff. I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. And obviously a lot of diseases are spread by air, but COVID-19 is one of them. I think it's also important to mention that Mother Miranda was directly affected by the Spanish influenza, and the Spanish influenza epidemic took place between 1918 and 1920, which is almost exactly 100 years prior to the COVID-19 epidemic. The Spanish flu is considered the second most deadly epidemic of all time. COVID-19 came in at number 5. And whether these connections in game were deliberate decisions or not, the theme of disease in Resident Evil Village creates a direct connection to real-world events without using them as direct inspirations for the events of the game. And doing so creates enough space for players to enjoy and relate to the plot and characters without feeling that burden of real-world events. With many people being forced to quarantine at home for the COVID-19 pandemic due to extenuating circumstances, we all became a little closer to our families, whether we liked it or not. Family is at the heart of Resident Evil Village in many ways. We see it as the basis for the conflict, the same yet opposing force driving both Ethan Winters and Mother Miranda. I've touched briefly on both, but let's dig in a little more. Mother Miranda did lose her daughter to Spanish influenza. Her grief led her to attempt to take her life in a cave outside of her village. This is where she discovered the mold, a large fungal mass that seemed to carry the memories of all the people consumed by the mold over time. When Miranda touched the mold, she was able to see and feel all these memories, including that of her late daughter, whose consciousness was assimilated into the mold after she was buried. Miranda became inspired, devoting the rest of her life to finding a suitable host for her daughter's consciousness. Included in these experiments were countless villagers, as well as Lady Dimitrescu, her daughters, Carl Heisenberg, Donna Bienviento, and Salvatore Moreau. Each of these 4 lords also deal with their own familial trauma that is revealed throughout their sections of the game. In a way, through infecting them with the Cadu, Mother Miranda created a new family with these 4 titans. All of Mother Miranda's actions are fueled by the love she has for her daughter, and as for the 4 lords, all of their actions are fueled by their loyalty or lack thereof to Mother Miranda. And you can argue that it's a familial loyalty due to the familial trauma that caused them to seek out this connection with Mother Miranda. So the game begins in the home of Ethan and Mia Winters. This extremely domestic start, in my opinion, is a deliberate way to drive home this theme of family from the beginning of the game. One of the first tasks is to put baby Rose to bed. Carrying this baby, walking around the cozy home of the Winters before it is crudely ripped away by Chris Redfield shooting Mia and kidnapping Rose is an insane start to any story. The first-person perspective of this game puts us in Ethan's shoes, and we feel this stark shift in tone even more because of that. The warmth of the house goes to this immediate cold, dark, and brutal landscape of the village, which again solidifies this tonal shift. We see and feel the family that Ethan has built, and to have that so quickly ripped away at the beginning leads to an immediate and guttural response from the players. Ethan's main objective of the game is to find his daughter and reunite his family as best as he can. But he and Mother Miranda have the same goal, to reunite with their daughters. But it's their tactics that oppose each other. And this is where the conflict stems from throughout the game. I can say from personal experience that most of the conflict I faced throughout the pandemic was due to my family and was with my family. And yes, I know this is a very simple connection, but I still feel it is necessary to point out. For many people, returning home was a tonal shift for them in their lives. Family can be positive, but it can also be very traumatizing. Family conflict is one of the most common kinds of conflict that almost anyone can relate to, which is why we find it so common in most forms of media. And the kind of familial conflict that is found in Resident Evil Village reflects what many people dealt with during quarantine. I think specifically of the scene when Ethan Winters is first kidnapped and wakes up to all the lords and Mother Miranda bickering. And that scene just feels like an average night at my father's house.
I wouldn't know responsibility if it was welded
to keep glory! One day your head will actually fit your ego!
Fight!
Hey, don't I get a say in this?
Silence!
Jokes aside, family is a driving force throughout this game. You cannot separate the theme of family from the plot or characters, as it motivates all of them in some way or another. Loss also drives the plot of RE8, as Mother Miranda's daughter died from the Spanish flu, which at this point I have mentioned several times already. This is how we got our inciting incident, as well as backstories for all of our enemies throughout the village. In addition to this, one of the first events we witness as Ethan in the game is the supposed murder of Mia and the kidnapping of his daughter. Ethan's grief kind of comes to a head in the Bienvento mansion, as he is forced to battle psychological torture at the hands of the spirits in the house. Donna Bienvento, the lord of that section of the village, lost her family at a young age due to suicide and was a recluse, often using her dolls to communicate to and with herself. While exploring the Bienvento house, Ethan must face auditory and visual hallucinations of his family and confront memories of their pasts. One of these hallucinations is the infamous deformed fetus that crawls towards you while cooing and crying, which was truly horrifying and gave me nightmares for weeks. I literally had to talk to my therapist, and my therapist had to beg me to stop playing the game because it kept giving me nightmares, but the game was so good I couldn't stop, you know? That aside, House Bienvento forces Ethan to confront his mistakes, losses, and grief, potential and realized, dealing with Mia and Rose. And at the end of the game, Ethan confronts Mother Miranda. Both are motivated by their love for their families and the fear of losing their daughters forever. Prior to this, Ethan realizes that he too is infected with the mold. In their final battle, after Ethan deals the final blow to Mother Miranda, she calls out her daughter's name.
My daughter! My Eva!
Ethan is extremely weak after this battle, but he has saved Rosemary from becoming another one of Mother Miranda's experiments. Ethan decides to sacrifice himself to save Rosemary, detonating a bomb to destroy the root of the mold forever. This perpetuates a cycle of grief that then drives Rosemary's story forward in the DLC Shadows of Rose. Rosemary, like Mia and Ethan, was also infected by the mold and tries to free herself, all while being guided by the consciousness or perhaps soul of her late father, Ethan. Unfortunately, like all pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a major loss of life. There was an overwhelming cloud of grief during this time, as many people lost family, friends, co-workers, loved ones, etc. I think almost everyone knew someone who had passed or knew someone who knew someone that passed, unfortunately due to complications with COVID-19. The grief that compels Mother Miranda into villainy is the same type of grief. Exactly, actually. Grief at the hands of an uncontrollable disease. I mean, literally her daughter passed due to a deadly epidemic. While Ethan's sense of loss is a different sort of complicated, as he's the protagonist, it works in a way, again, to create a sort of separation for the audience. We can all relate to the feelings of loss that Ethan faces, but because they are not directly caused by a deadly disease in the same way Mother Miranda's is. Because of this, we can find some distance from the events from our real world. As you can see, disease, family, loss, grief, these all are central to the plot and themes of Resident Evil Village. And these are all feelings that we all experienced throughout the COVID-19 epidemic. The fact that this game was released after the height of the pandemic is actually sort of insane how much these connect. There's an ability to relate to everything that all of these characters are going through, but in a way that doesn't make you confront your reality. That is, I just experienced a horrible pandemic for the first time in my life, and I'm severely traumatized by that. And while there is some elements of that, there's enough distance with the fantastical element that it doesn't feel like you're directly confronting those feelings. And I think that's really beautiful, and I think that's why I enjoyed this game so much, and I think it's also why I enjoyed playing it when I did. And I'm very lucky to have had a relatively smooth time throughout the pandemic, and I know a lot of people may not be able to relate to that, which is horrible, but media like this can provide escapism for people who went through very traumatizing experiences. And the Resident Evil franchise as a whole deals with a lot of this, but I think what Resident Evil Village does so well is it does take those fantastical elements of vampires and werewolves and mermaids and ghosts and all of these different kind of prototypes of monsters that we have talked about for ages feel not real, you know? Like they're not real, probably, right? And that distance brings comfort. When people are like video games aren't art, you're stupid. Video games can bring a lot of healing, they can bring entertainment, and they can bring escapism. And they're also just visually beautiful. The only crime that this game has is it gave us that horrible design of Chris Redfield. And if that's the worst part of this game, then I'll take it.
Ethan, no.
Unfortunately. That's pretty much all I have to say on this. Yeah, I love this game. I really love the stories of each of the lords the most. And that's what really brought me in, was that I thought the antagonists were so interesting and convincing and their designs were so cool. And I always think about when things are made, you know, it's like, why are we making this now? And obviously, like I said before, they couldn't have predicted everything that happened, but seems like divine timing with the way everything kind of laid out in the game and in real life. I don't know, just my thoughts. Let me know what you think about this new era of the Resident Evil franchise. Who's your favorite Resident Evil protagonist, antagonist? I'd love to know. Let's chat. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment. For $2.99 a month, you can become a Mia Likes member. There is priority review on your comments. There is also a exclusive members only community tab, and you will also get a shout out at the end of all of my videos. Speaking of which, shout out to Xylor, who is my first channel member. Thank you so much for all your support. If you'd like to join, that would be wonderful. If not, no worries. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this whole thing. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.